The Demerara Rebellion was a largely non-violent slave uprising, primarily led by Quamina Gladstone and his son Jack Gladstone in the British colony of Demerara-Essequibo, part of modern-day Guyana. Beginning on August 18, 1823, the rebellion involved an estimated 9,000 to 15,000 enslaved men and women who wanted emancipation. However, by August 20th, it was violently crushed by British authorities, where hundreds of slaves were killed and dozens were sentenced to death. Welcome to Black British Hub, where I talk about Black British history and colonial history in the British Empire. Stay tuned by hitting the like and subscribe button. The British took control of Demerara and Essequibo as combined colonies on April 28, 1812. Essequibo was previously a Dutch colony, and Demerara juggled from being a Dutch to British colony. Then from 1803 it would permanently be under British occupation. 9 years later it joined Essequibo to form the Demerara-Essequibo colony. Enslaved Africans were brought first to the Guyanese area in the second half of the 17th century by the Dutch. They became a key element to the colonial economy as they produced coffee, sugar and cotton for the Dutch markets. But the work conditions of enslaved Africans were brutal. The mortality rate was high, which led to more than half a dozen rebellions. Let's talk about the two main leaders of the rebellion, father and son, Quamina and Jack. Quamina was a carpenter who lived and worked on the Success Plantation in the east coast of Demerara, owned by Sir John Gladstone, a Scottish merchant and politician who never set foot onto the plantation. Quamina was born in modern-day Ghana from the Akan ethnic group in 1778. He and his mother were sold into slavery when he was a child. They were brought to Demerara, where his mother died in the plantation in 1817. In Success, Quamina was apprenticed to another slave, a master carpenter who had been brought from one of the Caribbean islands, where he had been exposed to Christianity through the work of British missionaries. In 1808, Quamina reluctantly accepted the master carpenter's invitation to attend a meeting conducted by Reverend John Ray. Ray from England arrived in Demerara in February 1808 to begin a Christian mission among slaves on behalf of the London Missionary Society. The mission was established at Plantation Le Réseau at the request of its owner, Hermanus Post. Later in the year, Post constructed a church, the Bethel Chapel, for Ray at the plantation. By December 26, 1808, Quamina was baptized by Ray and accepted into the chapel. Ray also taught Quamina to read and write in English. 4 years later, Sir John Gladstone acquired half of Success and acquired the remaining half 4.5 years later. It was at this time when Quamina earned the Gladstone surname. Ray went away to the neighbouring Burbis area and was replaced by Reverend John Smith, who was impressed by Quamina's hard-working abilities, caring for others. Quamina became widely respected by slaves and free black people alike throughout the colony. In 1817, the congregation elected him and 4 others as deacon, but Quamina's was Smith's personal favourite. Quamina had many wives, but he lived with Peggy, a freed woman, for 20 years. His own conditions in the plantation were very harsh, as he was regularly humiliated by his masters, once badly beaten and incapacitated for 6 weeks. He was frequently forced to work and regularly missed his services. In 1822, Peggy was taken seriously ill, but was not allowed to take time off to look after her as he was forced to work all day every day. One evening, when he came home, he found her dead. His son, Jack Gladstone, does not have a public date of birth or death, but was born in the plantation. He was a cooper, which is someone who makes or repairs casks or barrels. But he had more freedom than Quamina because he did not work under a driver, meaning he was not under the constant supervision of another slave appointed to the position. Therefore, he could roam about more. He hated limitations on his freedom as he earned the reputation of a wild fellow. He also became aware about the debate around slavery in London. He was baptized, occasionally became a teacher, but was not a regular churchgoer because following church rules was overwhelming for him. This is evident through his relationships with multiple enslaved black women. He once took Susanna from the plantation Le Réseau as his wife. She also attended John Smith's congregation. However, Quamina found out that she had become the mistress of John Hamilton, the manager at that plantation. Reverend Smith reacted angrily and she was expelled from the congregation by unanimous vote when she had refused to end the relationship. Jack married a slave on Chateau Margaux plantation, but would continue to have relations with several other women on the same plantation, to the disdain of both the owner of Margaux and the manager at Success. The planning for the rebellion began days before. Jack Gladstone and men and women had planned to seize the estates, time to win their freedom. A meeting was called the evening before the rebellion due to rumours of new laws relating to slavery being apparently suppressed by the authorities, attended by Quamina, Jack and other enslaved people. The new laws were based on discussions that took place in Parliament. English abolitionist MP Thomas Fowell Buxton introduced a resolution condemning the state of slavery as repugnant to the principles of the British Constitution and of the Christian religion, and called for its gradual abolition throughout the British colonies. Provisions were drawn up for colonial administrators. The Order of Council was under pressure from abolitionists. These provisions included restricting the daily working hours of the enslaved 9 and banned flogging for female slaves. Whilst the governor of Berbice immediately made a proclamation upon receiving his orders from London and instructed local parson John Ray to explain the provisions to his congregation, John Murray, his counterpart in Demerara, had received the order from London on 7th July 1823, and these measures proved controversial as they were discussed in the Court of Policy on 21st July and again on 6 August. They were passed as being inevitable, but the administration made no formal declaration as to its passing. The lack of formal declaration led to rumours that masters had received instructions to set the slaves free, but were refusing to do so. Quamina insisted the revolt should not involve killing and suggested that the enslaved people should go on strike. He went with some others to Smith's home, where they insisted the managers of the plantation should go to Georgetown to fetch up the new law. Smith begged them to wait until the governor told them about the new regulations. Quamina promised to obey Smith, and he sent his 2 companions to urge other enslaved people to wait a while longer. Although 9,000 to 15,000 participated in the revolt and wanted better treatment, most slaves were actually loyal to their masters. An enslaved house servant, Joseph Packwood, told his owner John Simpson about the planned revolt before it began. Subsequently, Simpson informed the governor, John Murray, who went to confront the enslaved with the colonial militia. The enslaved demanded for better conditions, but the governor ordered them to return to their plantations. But they refused and he declared martial law. Some went back to the plantations, but others participated in the rebellion. Jack Gladstone rang a bell as a signal for rebellion. Then more than 40 men and women came to him and told them it was time. The idea was to send them to the governor the following morning to bring back the new law. They first removed the guns, cutlasses, and ammunition from the estate storehouse. Quamina had previously warned them not to be violent in the process, and they followed his advice. They would only seize the weapons to protect themselves against a future attack. Along the public road to the coast, they would take control of one plantation after another. Unfortunately, the response from colonial authorities was maximum violence. The Royal Scots Fusiliers and the West India Regiment, which comprised both British and Caribbean soldiers, which were aided by a battalion of a British militia, were deployed. This is a reminder that some slaves were again loyal to their masters, and therefore they would have been in this regiment. Both troops, which were under the command of Lieutenant Colonel John Leahy, numbered around 400 to 500, and they were joined by the militia by the evening of August 19th. When they arrived at one of the plantations, Bachelor's Adventure, they were surrounded by 3,000 to 4,000 slaves, armed with cutlasses or muskets. Leading officers approached the rebels and asked what they wanted. The response, most likely coming from Jack Gladstone, was, "Massa treat all too bad. Make we work Sundays, no let we go chapel, no give time for work in we garden. Lick all we took much. We here for true great buckra, give we free, and massa no let we have nothing." With the slaves that refused to go back to the plantations after martial law, an uneasy standoff continued for about an hour, with rebels and soldiers stood watching each other. The deadlock was broken by some of the rank and file rebels, who cried out, "Catch the big buckra, tie him, tie him." In response, Leahy ordered his troops to open fire. Though some rebels were armed with muskets and returned fire, too few of them had guns, and they were inexperienced with the use of their firearms. They were soon outgunned by professional soldiers who discharged volley after volley into the rebel ranks. As the rebels ran for cover, some 200 were shot down, with only one colonial soldier, the Boogler, killed in return. Indeed, even he was felled by friendly fire from his own side. Just a few other soldiers were left injured. Other sources estimate that up to 500 were killed. Only a small handful of whites were killed. Witnesses said the slaves actually practiced restraint, which is even more evidence that the rebellion was largely non-violent. On August 25th, 72 enslaved people suspected of being leaders were put on trial. They were charged with having, on or about the night of the Monday, 18th August last, been in open revolt and rebellion, and actively engaged therein against the peace of our sovereign Lord the King and the laws enforced within this colony, and also aiding and assisting others in such rebellion. 51 were condemned to death. 10 of these were decapitated and their heads were stuck on poles as a warning to the enslaved, and 16 were sentenced to 1,000 lashes, which was a death sentence within itself. The rest were given lengthy prison sentences. Quamina went on the run before being hunted and shot to death. His body was then hung up in the gibbet and chains outside the Success plantation. A colony of wasps built a nest in the cavity of the stomach. They were also flying in and out of Quamina's jaws, which were open. Jack Gladstone was also on the run, but he was tracked down, captured and deported to St. Lucia. In October, Reverend John Smith stood on trial as colonists were convinced that he was an outside agitator responsible for revolt. He was charged with inciting slaves to rebellion and sentenced to hanging for complicity. On February 6, 1812, he died from malnutrition and tuberculosis after 6 months in prison whilst awaiting for the king's pardon that came a week too late. He was only 34 years old. We have reached the end of the video and I hope you learned something new. All the sources will be listed in the description. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this.